Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another R-rated review of Marvel's What If. This time looking at episode 3, What If the World Lost Its Mightiest Heroes. It's been a little while since we've had one of these. It's been a busy couple weeks, but I've decided to take a little time to start getting things caught up. You'll be seeing a bunch of these over the coming week to get us all caught up with the newest episodes. So just right off the top, literally the day that Sarah and I sat down to watch this one, I think I even said out loud, I was like, oh man, it'd be kind of interesting to get one that's like, what if the Avengers are just kind of like they're just out of commission, like they can't do anything. They're not there for the invasion, or they're not there to stop Thanos, yada yada, all that kind of stuff. So like, we kind of get a real clear picture of that with this episode. And not only that, fans of the movies who haven't really gone beyond that might not recognize the format that this episode takes, but this is basically a what-if variant version on a tie-in comic for... I forget if they did it for the Avengers or they did it before the Avengers, but it was called Nick Fury's Big Week, or maybe Fury's Big Week. But the idea being Iron Man 2... The Incredible Hulk and Thor all take place extremely close together, and if you follow the events of the movies, you can actually see how they interweave. Literally, like Phil Coulson leaves Iron Man 2 because he's been relocated to go deal with something out in the desert in New Mexico, and you see him arrive at the end in the Stinger, and then he arrives as part of the movie Thor. At the end of Iron Man 2, Tony winds up being shown like news broadcasts of the Hulk's rampage on Culver University. And I'm trying to think, I think there's one more big one that I'm forgetting. Doesn't matter. Point is, these are all happening really, really tightly together. And this episode is kind of a cool, like, alternate take on that. Essentially, like, what if in the middle of the most important, 5 days of the Avengers formation, if everything just went horribly wrong? They do some interesting stuff. They actually do a really good job of kind of retreading those three movies in a way. Not like the whole movies, obviously, but like some of the more iconic moments from those three movies get little send-ups here. So, for example, Tony in the donut from Iron Man 2, while he's suffering, perhaps, I guess, at his worst from his palladium poisoning, you get the drive up of Nick Fury and Natasha Romanoff. Sir, I'm going to have you to step out of the donut, or come down from the donut. I forget which one it was. And then the conversation they have in the diner. I'm a little surprised, to be honest. So one thing that I do want to say overall, I don't know how much I'm going to keep getting into this, but the voice acting continues to be like a B. It's decent voice acting. I've certainly heard worse, but there's definitely kind of a lack of, there's like a little more oomph that could really go in there that it's kind of missing in these episodes. And it kind of stands out anytime they essentially redo a piece of a movie that exists already. So, for example, the like, sir, I'm going to have you to step down from the donut. Like, they don't use the audio from Iron Man 2. They re-record it, which, like, on the one hand makes sense since they're not using Robert Downey Jr. as the voice of Tony Stark, so it'd sound a little weird if they did something differently there. But at the same time, anytime there's a scene where... So, all right, I was going to say Bruce Banner's in there a bunch, but we'll get to that. But yeah, it would be... Maybe it's a matter of the voice actors not lining up quite as well as they'd need to for that to feel seamless. But the end result is, anytime you get line deliveries that came from, like, script-wise, came directly from the movies, they do tend to sound a little flatter. They sound a little bit more ADR-ish than they did in the movies. And I'm sure a bunch of the ones in the movies were also ADR, but they were, like, coached to get that energy out of it. Everyone sounds... a worse version of this, everyone would sound bored. In this, it's almost a little bit more like a slight bit detached or disaffected. So there's a lot of times there's a little bit of a missing energy to it or something. It's not all the time. Some of the voice actors do a really good job with it. More often than not, the non-MCU live action actors are the ones doing the best with the voices, which makes sense if they're voice actors. But there are times where it's like, okay, it's not helping this episode not feel a little bit by the numbers when the voice acting comes off as a little less emotional and a little bit less energetic than it should be. So Tony and the Donut is one that turns up, and that one winds up being just a nice introduction to the idea of this episode, namely that someone is going around and killing the Avengers, or rather the Avenger candidates. This is the formation of the Avengers. The other retreads that we get Thor's infiltration of the shield compound, the little pop-up shield compound around the Mjolnir crash site. That one in particular, there's a lot of really like dark quick little cutaways in the dark of him like grabbing someone and pulling him into the back, or like knocking someone out and moving them aside. And all of those are done in a way where it is simultaneously a really good representation and rework of how it looked in the movie, along with looking really good for like a comic book like panel, like a splash panel or an action panel or something. They have been pretty good about getting those kind of action moments and those little like splash page kind of moments into this series so far. It's actually one of their strongest points overall, is that the 3D models are not necessarily perfect, but the way they use their environment and the mixing of the 2D and the 3D elements does really like work. It blends really well together. The third retread we get is Bruce's transformation into the Hulk and his rampage at Culver University. Like the moment he jumps through the glass out of the bridge, there's a good like 15 seconds that looks like they may as well have rotoscoped it from the movie. And it does feel a little detached from a lot of the rest of the episode, because they seem to be trying to like match as well as they can to the footage from the Incredible Hulk. It's not bad. It does feel a tiny bit jarring when you're going from a more dynamic like handycam feeling moment to one that's a little more steadicam, or not steadicam, tripod shot style, like a lockdown shot. So those are our three retreads. I think they all looked pretty solid in different ways, but it was pretty cool to get those like really good callbacks to the Big Week trilogy, as you could call them. It's interesting that I would say this episode, one of its strengths is Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor. They have their links that tie them together, but they're pretty thin links. Oh, the other one was that Tony Stark shows up in the stinger to the Incredible Hulk, but that's kind of detached from everything in a way that it's not like immediately tying it like the events together that tightly. So the Big Week trilogy is not very tightly tied together. Like you could easily see, for the most part, minus the actual actors from one appearing in the other, you could easily see different movies from different studios dropping those same little lines and just having them be like throwaway Easter eggs. It doesn't really like fully tie them together. It wasn't until the Avengers came out that it really like yanked all these strings together. However, this episode does a really good job of making them feel way more tightly integrated with each other, way more interwoven. The events of so you've got these different events all happening in the same span of time, and you can feel the weight of one thing going wrong really messing with what's happening in another location. So that is definitely a huge strength of this episode. It makes those three movies feel way more interlinked, and I think that's a really cool way to re-examine it. I don't think any other take on Nick Fury's Big Week would work as well. I think being able to have that kind of causal link between them really is a really important fixture. If they didn't have anything really affecting one or the other, I don't think this episode would have been all that interesting in the first place. And this one does a really good job with that. You have a good sense that like the dominoes are falling, basically. So I keep putting my hand in front of my hand may not even be in camera, depending on where I crop this. So yeah. Also, this episode is kind of the start of a trend with this show of things kind of going wrong. We'll get into it over the next couple of reviews, but we reach a point as we get to the middle of the season where each episode is getting progressively darker and more messed up than the ones before it. So episode 1, at the end of the day, it's basically gender swapping Captain America. You swap the roles of Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter, but for the most part, the action and the not the action, but like the progression, the story elements progress kind of the same way. The biggest exceptions being Bucky never falls and becomes the Winter Soldier. Probably the biggest shift overall in the narrative for that one. The other one, I guess, being that Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull, has a completely different endgame in mind than he did in the movie. But otherwise, you have Peggy Carter going through the same basic steps as Steve Rogers did, to the point where Howard Stark just gives her the circular shield that in the actual movie was a prototype that was never intended to be used that way. Gives her a Union Jack outfit and all of this stuff, and it doesn't really... It feels like it's really forcing itself to be a mirror of the first Avenger. Episode 2 is basically, okay, what if a good person was Star-Lord? And we're now getting it... And that one kind of went the exact opposite direction, where before the episode even starts, you have basically an entirely different interstellar story going on. Almost nothing is familiar. Nothing is really all that close to how the movies portrayed them. So you don't really get to see how that different choice affects the smaller, more immediate things. You find, like, at this point, we're 25-ish years later, and Thanos is more or less a good guy, and the Collector has become an omnicidal maniac, or not omnicidal, but, trying to control the universe kind of character, and all of those things. And it doesn't play it up as a thing that's gone horribly wrong until the very, very end, when you get that little stinger with Ego, and it's like, oh, that's bad, because if Peter doesn't fight off Ego, and he works with him, then the universe is probably fucked. And they kind of refer and allude to that in the end of the episode. This one starts out right away taking a darker spin, because within about 2 minutes, Tony Stark is dead. And then the ramifications are extremely bad and get much worse. So the Avenger Deaths were kind of interesting. The choice of people to kill in universe, the explanation of most of them is good enough. It makes sense why four of the 5 are killed. But it does... There's not a lot of work put into not making it feel a little convenient and maybe a bit contrived. It does feel like it's just like, oh, well, the Avengers would normally come together as a team, so those are the people who are going to die. Like, it feels a little forced. And it also begs the question of, so were there no other Avenger candidates besides the 5 plus Thor that eventually became the original Avengers? I'm actually a little surprised that there's not any kind of indication that, like, oh, we had another 1 or 2, but they already died, or they didn't want in, or something else. Like, the Abomination, for example, was technically an Avenger candidate from the World Security Council at one point. We never... I guess this predates when the Abomination would have been a candidate in the first place, because it happens after the Incredible Hulk, and this takes place alongside the Incredible Hulk. And for all we know, Emil Blonsky just never becomes the Abomination at all. Probably doesn't. But it does still feel... Thor in particular feels extremely convenient. And even when the murderer is pressed about this, he immediately like shrinks back and is like, well, yeah, you would have pulled him in anyway. And it's like, oh, even in story, it's acknowledging that it's like a really flimsy premise there. But I will say that the deaths themselves, for the most part, were pretty shocking. Two of them more than any, I would say. So in order in the episode, we see Tony Stark die, and it happens really suddenly. And I think they do a really good job of settling you into a false sense of security. Excuse me. Wow. Oh my God. Settling you into a false sense of security, and then swerving with it, and boom, he's on the floor dead. After that, we get Thor being killed by Hawkeye, meaning Hawkeye had his arrow on him, and the murderer made it so that Hawkeye loosed his arrow, and it pierced Thor's heart and instantly killed him. So Tony Stark's, very effective death. Thor's, both even an arrow to his heart, I still feel like Thor would be a bit more resilient than that based off of the other battles we see them the Asgardians engaging in, especially like an earth arrow, and I don't know. That one's it's not that far-fetched, but it does feel a little like, really? That was all it took, was just one arrow and he's down? Okay. So that's Thor. And again, incredibly flimsy premise, and even once you find out the reason why they hadn't identified him, he hadn't lifted Mjolnir, he was just a big buff blonde guy. Like, I'm not really sure how the murderer wound up deciding that was how that was going to go. I'm pretty sure either he's just killing for the hell of it at that point, or making excuses or something, but that doesn't track very well. It feels more like they didn't think that one through all the way, and they were like, just go with it. We'll go with it. Shortly after, Hawkeye gets killed, and it literally looks like the murderer just fucked with his brain and killed him. Like, it happens off screen. We don't really know much about it. It's definitely one that's a bummer because he dies in the middle of being incredibly confused and depressed, because Hawkeye doesn't miss. He never misses. He never messes up, and he never misses, and he hits his targets every time. And that is the mood he was in when he died. We get, Bruce Banner after that. For starters, we get Bruce Banner as portrayed by Bruce Banner in the Incredible Hulk scenario as portrayed by Mark Ruffalo. I was a little surprised by that. Not necessarily that it was like Mark Ruffalo, because obviously they'll do Mark Ruffalo. They're not going to bring Ed Norton back for that. It was just sort of it was unexpected to see him there and talking. The model they used for him, I think they were trying to make Mark Ruffalo, who has a very square sort of head, I find anyway. They tried to make him like they tried to make his 3D model like halfway between him and Ed Norton, who is a very like slim figure, slim face, really narrow. And the end result was just, I don't know, it was kind of a young and chubby looking, not chubby, but like a little bit chubby looking Mark Ruffalo. And even then, it didn't look all that close. Some of the 3D models are like weirdly far away from who they are intended to be. But it was neat to see Mark Ruffalo delivering lines, that essentially were done by Ed Norton before. That's a really good example of needing to re-record some lines, even if they went with the ones that were already there. But Bruce absolutely has the most horrifying shit go on. He basically defends Black Widow and Betty Ross, and is like, I sort of can't die, and it's like, oh god, because the murderer basically makes the Hulk's heart grow and explode, essentially in a way that makes his mutation, his radiation mutation, go absolutely berserk. Like, imagine, so Bruce turning into the Hulk, imagine the Hulk hulking out again, is kind of what happens to him. And he essentially turns into a giant green balloon and explodes into a mass of green liquid. It's really haunting. It's one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in any comic book, like, video related thing. I've seen worse stuff in comics, not a whole lot in movie, TV, animation form. It's way up there. It's just, especially for Marvel, who usually plays it pretty G-rated overall when it comes to the violence. That was like, Jesus Christ, that was really fucked up and horrifying. And then Natasha she looks like she gets beat up by a ghost and then gets dragged into the dark, and then we never see her again. So yeah, Tony Stark, solid death. The Hulk, really fucked up death. The other three are like, eh. So that's where that is. I think this is probably a good place to drop it. In case, if you don't want spoilers, then this is the time to check out. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So fairly early into the episode, I was wondering, like, okay, who even has a connection to, like, S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers who could be pissed off and want to do this? Because they say very early on that it's someone on the inside. And I don't know if it was my first guess, because my first guess, I think, was that Ghost was doing something. I was not that far off, because my second guess was correct, and that one was Ant-Man, Hank Pym, was doing some shit. So in the comics, Hank Pym kind of has a really unfortunate reputation. Not entirely unearned, but it's at a point where someone decided to write him doing a pretty bad thing, and he's been characterized in shorthand by that ever since. And this was like 40 years ago. For the unaware, I don't know the exact details of it, but essentially, like, an angry Hank Pym. I don't even know if I thought that he was, like, possessed or something too, which adds another layer of shit to it. But Hank Pym basically hits Janet Van Dyne in a comic, like, once. And I think at some point he's implied to be a heavy drinker in some of the older comics too. And so Hank Pym has a reputation in the comic sphere of just being a wife beater, which is perhaps a bit of an exaggeration of his overall character, since, as far as I'm aware, it happened once, and it's basically been written out of the canon at this point. They're like, yeah, we don't really like having that be a thing. It certainly hasn't happened in the movies that we're aware of, or the movie universe, rather. But I think this is their attempt to have a kind of a rotten version of Hank Pym, like a bad guy Hank Pym, to, like, do stuff with as a character. And my assumption was he was mad at them for letting Janet, like, disappear / die, and this was him exacting revenge years later instead of learning to, like, you know, move on or all of those things. Oh my God, Michael Douglas. I was like, who plays him? How am I forgetting this? Michael Douglas does a pretty good job with the voice acting, I gotta say. He actually is among the best of the live action actors to have done the voice acting for this. I thought he did a good job with it. But yeah, Hank Pym, essentially, it wasn't him getting revenge over his wife, it was him getting revenge over his daughter, because Hope, in this timeline, the Nexus event was that, well, we know that the earliest result of the Nexus event is that Hope Van Dyne became a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. It could have been because of something earlier on, but at the very least, Hope becomes a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, and in, I think, around 2009, I think around 2009, she goes on a mission to Odessa, Ukraine, which is, like, such a subtle reference. Like, I had to go look it up, because I was like, are they referring to this? And then it was. In Captain America, Winter Soldier, Steve is talking about the Winter Soldier, and then Natasha basically says that she's run into him once before on a mission to Odessa, Ukraine, and I think she was the only survivor of the mission. Like, they were transporting someone, and the Winter Soldier got there and killed everyone, and she was the only one to get out. So basically, the difference in this timeline is that Hope was the one sent on that mission, and she did not get out of there alive. So that sends Hank into a furious rage. Now his wife and daughter are dead, or his wife is thought to be dead. His daughter is dead. And so he starts killing off the Avengers candidates. And again, 4 of those 5 at least have a justification. The Thor one still does not make sense to me. That one still feels like it was like, that's just a very convenient thing to put in there. But the villainous Hank Pym was pretty cool. We actually see him in the Yellow Jacket outfit, which is, I think that's a thing that happened in the comics too. I assume that the idea is Hank lost basically all of his empathy and decided to work with I'm never going to remember his name, bad guy from the first Ant-Man movie, to build the Yellow Jacket suit that he then uses to do all of his stuff. So this is all pretty horrible. Eventually, and somewhat predictably, Asgard finds out that Thor is dead. Like, he was meant to go to Earth and learn to be a better person, and instead he was killed by an Earthling. So Loki, Lady Sif, the Warriors 3, and a whole Asgardian army show up. And Nick has to think on his feet pretty quickly in order to get them to not just raze the planet to the ground. And I like what they did with this, because Loki, one of the big things about Loki, especially early on, is that he's not like explicitly villainous exactly. He's like trying to... He's sort of feels like the black sheep, and that he's the outcast, and that he's like not good enough for his family. And this kind of highlights in a nice way that like he does still care about Asgard, and he is still, he cares about Thor, and he cares about his people and all of those things. It's a nice way of having him be villainous while also having him have like a pretty justifiable reason. Like, Thor got murdered by someone on Earth, whether it was Hawkeye or not, and that's definitely something that he's going to show up to try to deal with. So Loki winds up delivering a lot of like echoes and things of how things went, especially in the Avengers. This movie is interesting because it opens by being a dark take on Nick Fury's big week, and ends by being a compressed version of the plot to the Avengers, but a much darker version of it, where rather than Loki leading Thanos' army of Chitauri to take over New York and then failing, instead Loki shows up with the army of Asgard, and in the end winds up actually taking over. There's a really cool fight scene. Nick Fury is eventually able to talk with Loki and be like, essentially, I figured out the killer, and I want you to help me take him in. You can even take him to your own people and do whatever you want with him there, but I know who killed my people, and I know who killed your brother. And there's this really cool sequence of essentially Hank Pym trying really hard to attack Nick Fury, but Nick Fury seems to just be really effortlessly just swatting him out of the air, hitting him with stuff, eventually having duplicates and flying, and it's like, oh, that's Loki, which also explains why he had no problem at all seeing where Hank Pym was, because being the trickster god he is, he's up with those sorts of illusions and things. It's not really an illusion, but he would have enough awareness to be able to detect that and be able to react and all of that. Really cool, clever use of the fight scene. Really interesting to have Nick Fury and Loki on the same team for that fight. However, in the end, Loki winds up, being like, actually, I think I'm going to stay. And then walks into the UN and addresses the world being like, by the way, you belong to us now. So I thought that was kind of an interesting swerve on that. And you get that Loki smirk. Loki actually tricks Hank Pym into shooting Hope's grave a whole bunch, which is pretty great. And symbolism, so much symbolism. And even Hank kind of is like, oh no, as he realizes what just happened, which I think was kind of cool there. Yeah, I don't know. Benedict Cumberbatch was nice to hear in this episode. I guess this is also another variant Loki, which is kind of fun to think about. I think this is our first variant Loki in the series, because the first one was all Captain America, Captain Carter. The second one was Star-Lord. So yeah, this is our first appearance of another variant Loki. So that's kind of fun. We get one of those in there. There's some stuff that kind of jumped out at me as like a little odd with this episode. Natasha gets taken in by S.H.I.E.L.D. There's actually a cameo by Crossbones as one of the S.H.I.E.L.D. members. I think it's the strike team that's taking her away, since she is suspected of killing Tony Stark because she was holding the needle. And Hank Pym is in the syringe and, goes in and prevents anything from coming out of the syringe and like just kills Tony Stark right then and there. I'm sure that him killing Tony Stark makes perfect sense because he hated Howard Stark, so that all makes perfect sense. But Natasha gets brought away in a van, and then she beats up everyone in the van, and then up front, Crossbones is like, "Oh no, she's trying to escape," and then he runs to the back, throws open the doors, and she's gone. And I'm like, "But how? At what point did she get out? At what point? How did she get out? Did she get out and close the doors? Were they openable from the inside?" There's no holes anywhere. I don't know how that was supposed to work exactly, but I don't know. She got out of the van. This episode also features Phil Coulson like ogling Thor a lot. Like gaga goo goo eyes all over him. He is like fawning over him as he's breaking into the base. After Thor is dead, he comments on how like he smells like lavender, and he repeatedly smells him very closely, and it's like, oh god, no. His password is apparently #Steve I heart Steve 0704, which is like, it was cute in the Avengers that he had Captain America trading cards and he was kind of starstruck. It is like unsettlingly weird that that's his password. And that's the way that he's acting around Thor, and it's like, yo, fucking, like, down, boy, down. Also, I'm surprised that Coulson doesn't recognize the Captain Marvel beeper. At one point, Nick Fury's like, we're gonna need some help, and he almost calls for Captain Marvel, but he doesn't. And Coulson's like, is that a beeper from the 90s? And it's like, dude, you were there. you were part of that sequence of events. You weren't there for long, but I have extreme doubts that Nick Fury never told you about the beeper. So yeah, there's that. Let's see. I already talked about Mark Ruffalo as Ed Norton's Bruce Banner. There's a spot there. There's also an increasing involvement of the Watcher over the course of the season, and I'm starting to wonder if the last episode of the season is going to feature the Watcher actively getting involved. This time, he's just kind of hanging out in the background. Like, you see the silhouette of the Watcher in the distance. I think it was a driving shot in the desert or something. The first two episodes I had like one shot of the Watcher, like, at all. And this one was like, oh, there he is. Really hard to miss. That was kind of an odd thing there. Also, the Avenger logos. So the Avengers all have logos. They don't really get used in the MCU basically at all. I'm not sure if their logos actually get used anywhere in the movies. Black Widow is kind of an exception. She has her kind of hourglass kind of logo going on. But after those 4 Avenger candidates and Thor are all killed, they have coffins with the circular logos of each of them on it. And it's like, okay, one, you had someone like fabricate or otherwise like draw up logos for these guys and put them on their coffins. That's kind of fucked up. 2, Thor has a logo. So after Thor died, failing to lift Mjolnir, by the way, someone went, we got to draw a logo for him. Let's make it a hammer. Let's make it the fist with the hammer. That seems pretty good. He never held Mjolnir in front of anybody, so I have no idea how they wound up with that. Very, very weird. Yeah, I don't know. And I think Bruce Banner's was like a fist, and it's like, these are such ridiculous logos. I can't even. Loki actually uses the Casket of Winters when he confronts Nick Fury, which I thought was pretty cool. Nice little cameo from that. First time we've seen it get used since Thor, I think. And I did like in the end, Nick Fury, at the threat of Loki now taking over the world, is like, I gotta go find Cap, and he goes and finds Cap, and Captain Marvel shows up too, so we get Cap and Cap together, the first 2 Avengers. together at last. I've theorized loosely on this before, but I'm really hoping that the plan for season 2 of this show, it's been greenlit for season 2, would be follow-up sequels to each of these episodes. I would love to see an episode that follows up on Captain Carter as a member of the Avengers, especially since Tony Stark may not be involved at all, since the Winter Soldier never killed Howard, which means that Howard Stark stayed in charge of Stark Industries. Like maybe an elderly Howard Stark is part of the Avengers or something. I don't know. I would love to see some kind of take on T'Challa being the Star-Lord, though obviously that's kind of difficult. And I would especially love to see a follow-up on this, where the Avengers are dead and Captain Marvel and Captain America. For starters, there are barely two further apart superheroes on the spectrum of actual superheroic abilities that you could even put together in the first place. Captain America is essentially what is the maximum amount of any physical skill that a person could have, like in real life. That's Captain America. There's a little bit beyond that, but the basic idea is he's peak physicality, basically. And Captain Marvel, who is one step down from being a space god. So, yeah, I don't know. I would love to see the two of them and Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to take on... I don't even know what they would do. I guess take on Loki, but Asgard probably feels a pretty righteous claim to overseeing Midgard since Thor died there. That could be an interesting sequel to follow up on. Overall, the episode is really good. The voices, like I was saying before, were kind of hit or miss. There were some surprising non-returning voices. Captain Marvel was not voiced by Brie Larson, and that makes sense. She had one line. Tony Stark was also not voiced by Robert Downey Jr., who I think is now entirely out from his contract, and I think Chris Evans is as well. Tony Stark has a couple lines, not a ton. Betty Ross is not portrayed by Liv Tyler. I don't know if she's ever going to come back to the MCU. I'd be curious to see if they ever do that. General Ross is not portrayed by William Hurt, which is interesting since he's actively been in movies recently. And the Abomination is in Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings, so it's not like they're just ignoring the Incredible Hulk lately. The biggest oof is that Natasha Romanoff is not voiced by Scarlett Johansson, which is probably for the best given the current relationship that she and Disney have right now. That's a whole mess for another day. But that was kind of a notable. I was like, I wonder, because that doesn't sound like her, and it wouldn't surprise me if they did not have her right now. But yeah, the episode overall basically was a really cool murder mystery. I thought it was neat to have S.H.I.E.L.D. scrambling to solve this mystery before time runs out, and time still kind of runs out. And the really aggressive Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you feel the march of time in a big way. And I thought they did a pretty cool job putting it all together. There were some contrivances and a couple weaknesses that didn't really make it the best for me, but I think it was still a solid episode. And so far of the three, I'd say it's my favorite. I would give What If the World Lost Its Mightiest Heroes a 7. I think it was solid, pretty entertaining, pretty good stuff. Great. The retreads of the big week movies was really awesome. I thought the twist with Loki was really cool. Several twists in a row. I'd be very curious to see, because now if Loki's never found by Thanos, I'm curious how Thanos' plans for the future would work, or would they? Would they even really be happening much at all, or is he just kind of stalled out, So interesting stuff. Yeah, I really liked it. It was pretty solid. I'm looking forward to more episodes. I've got some more reviews coming out over the coming days. Hopefully, we can get back caught up by this time next week and get everything back into place. I would love to hear what you guys think of the episode. I'd love to hear what you think of this video. I know it's a little bbit more sporadic and a little bit all over the place. It's a little bit late. I'm pretty wiped out, but doing the best I can with that. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I would love to hear what you guys think they're going to do with some of the remainders of these episodes as well. I don't know if they've publicly revealed what all of the episodes are going to be about. I do kind of hope the last one involves the Watcher actively getting involved. That'll be pretty exciting if so. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm hoping to have another one of these up tomorrow for episode 4. What if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? That one's a pretty interesting one for sure. So I hope to see you there. Have a good one, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye.